Throughout American history, Native Americans have been oppressed on a state and national level. Treaties with the government have been broken, and Indians have been forced to live off of inhospitable plots of land called reservations. Many times Native Americans have attempted to gain rights diplomatically as well as through force. One such occasion was Wounded Knee, 1973. By early 1973, many Native American Oglala Sioux tribe members had had enough of Richard Wilson's actions as tribal chair. The massive amount of corruption, brutal treatment of full-blood Lakotas, as well as the near intolerable living standards in Pine Ridge, drove these Native Americans to action. At first, the Oglala Sioux attempted to impeach Dick Wilson, but when this attempt failed, the Oglala Sioux Lakota elders began to feel powerless. So out of desperation, they met with the American Indian Movement, a militant Indian rights group, for assistance to help overthrow Richard Wilson. The two groups met and formulated a plot that would ideally end in Dick Wilson's dismissal and the government free of BIA interference, or Bureau of Indian Affairs. The execution of this plot began on February 27, 1973, when AIM and traditional Oglala Sioux took over Wounded Knee, eventually declaring Wounded Knee a separate nation on March 11, 1973. The Independent Oglala Nation, or ION, and sent a representative to the United Nations with a plea for help against federal and state governments, although this plea would ultimately be ignored. As the National Guard and federal marshals surrounded the area, blocked off roads entering Wounded Knee, and arrested anyone exiting the town, the occupiers set up fences and barricades and increased their list of demands. The new list of demands increased to include Senate review of Indian treaties, handling of Indian affairs by the BIA and the Department of the Interior, and review of conditions on all Sioux reservations in South Dakota. The federal forces attempted to negotiate with AIM leaders, but as negotiations broke down, militaristic force took over. The siege continued and reporters were brought to Wounded Knee to increase the attention focused on the situation, to increase tension for the federal forces, to witness the traditional Native American life, as well as the now nightly shootings.
As the reporters brought sympathy and attention for the Native Americans occupying Wounded Knee and made the government look bad, the government expelled the reporters from Wounded Knee. However, even after the media was gone, the Oglala Sioux kept fighting the battle against the federal government, who eventually cut off electricity and supplies. When resistance continued, the federal government restarted negotiations with AIM on May 1st. The promises included protection against Dick Wilson, further meetings regarding the 1868 treaty, civil and criminal prosecutions of occupants through the tribal system, and refraining from recommending bond for those with federal warrants. The siege finally ended on May 8th, when federal forces took over the town and betrayed many of the promises made while negotiating with the Oglala Sioux during the siege. Many occupants were arrested and tried, but the charges were eventually dismissed. Wilson, infuriated by the event, increased his violence against the occupants. Although the siege may have seemed like a failure, it was a great success. The Oglala lived as free Native Americans once more, and many tribal governments across the nation began to support their people and their independence. Ultimately, John Madison's idea of enlarging the sphere did not work because Native Americans were oppressed on the state and national level. They even appealed to the international community, but were ignored. The sympathy and support that came with the press coverage from Wounded Knee was ultimately overshadowed by the Watergate scandal. Wounded Knee 1973 reminded many Native Americans to remember their heritage. It also improved life on reservations and opened the eyes of average Americans to the Native Americans' plight. The struggle at Wounded Knee 1973 still influences America today in their treatment of Native Americans and the life of people on reservations.